the broken engine, and the stranger. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt as Cassie Wells stared at the steam rising from her truck's hood. Miles of empty desert stretched in every direction, with only the distant outline of red rock mesas breaking the horizon. Her cell phone showed no signal, and the nearest town was still 15 miles away. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dust and frustration. "Come on, old girl," she muttered to the ancient pickup truck that had belonged to her grandfather. "Don't give up on me now." The truck had been her lifeline since inheriting the small cattle ranch 3 years ago. Every penny she earned went back into keeping the place running, and she couldn't afford a breakdown, especially not today. She had a meeting with the bank tomorrow morning, one that would determine whether she could keep her family's legacy or lose everything to foreclosure. As she lifted the hood, a cloud of steam billowed out, making her step back and cough. The radiator was bone dry, and she could see the telltale signs of a blown gasket. Without proper tools or water, she was stranded. That's when she heard the sound of hoofbeats on gravel. Turning, Cassie squinted through the heat haze and saw a figure approaching on horseback. The rider moved with an easy confidence, his horse's gait steady and sure despite the rough terrain. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A man in faded jeans and a dusty brown shirt, a worn cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes, and boots that had seen countless miles of hard riding. He looked like something out of an old Western movie, she thought, complete with the mysterious stranger routine. "Looks like you could use some help," he called out as he approached, his voice carrying a slight rasp that spoke of too many nights around campfires and too much desert wind. Cassie straightened, instinctively defensive. Living alone on a remote ranch had taught her to be cautious around strangers, especially ones who appeared out of nowhere in the middle of nowhere. "I'm fine," she replied, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her anxiety. "Just a little engine trouble." The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, leaving his reins loose as his horse immediately dropped its head to crop at the sparse grass growing beside the road. The animal was well trained, Cassie noted, and well cared for despite the dust coating. "Its coat. Name's Dante," he said simply, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and startlingly blue eyes. "Dante Rivers. And unless you've got a spare radiator and about 5 gallons of coolant in your back pocket, you're not fine." Despite herself, Cassie found her lips twitching toward a smile. "Cassie Wells, and you're right about the radiator." Dante approached the truck, his movements careful and non-threatening. "Mind if I take a look?" She gestured toward the steaming engine. "Be my guest, but I should warn you, I've been working on engines since I was 12, and this one's got me stumped." He leaned over the engine bay, his hands moving with surprising knowledge as he examined the damage. "Blown head gasket," he confirmed after a moment. "She's not going anywhere without a tow." "Great," Cassie sighed, kicking at a loose stone. "Just perfect." "Nearest town?" Dante asked. "Copper Creek, about 15 miles that way." She pointed down the road. "But there's no cell service out here, and I don't exactly have a horse." Dante studied her for a moment, those blue eyes seeming to see more than they should. "I could give you a ride." Cassie's defensive walls shot back up. "I don't even know you." "No, you don't," he agreed easily. "But you've got 2 choices. Trust a stranger or spend the night in the desert with the coyotes and rattlesnakes." As if summoned by his words, a distant howl echoed across the landscape, followed by another. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Besides," Dante added, settling his hat back on his head, "my horse can carry 2, and I know a mechanic in Copper Creek who owes me a favor." Something in his tone suggested there were many people who owed Dante Rivers favors, though Cassie couldn't imagine why. He looked like just another drifting cowboy. the kind who worked ranches for a season before moving on to the next job. Fine, she said finally. But I drive my own truck once it's fixed. Wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise, Dante replied with a grin that transformed his entire face. Grab whatever you need from the truck. Cassie retrieved her purse and a small overnight bag from behind the seat, locking the truck out of habit, even though it wasn't going anywhere. Dante's horse, a sturdy bay with intelligent eyes, stood perfectly still as she approached. This is Tucker, Dante said, stroking the horse's neck. He's carried heavier loads than both of us combined. I've never ridden double before, Cassie admitted. Nothing to it. Just hold on tight and trust Tucker to do the work. Dante swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then extended his hand to help her up behind him. The moment her arms circled his waist, Cassie became acutely aware of the solid warmth of his body, the way his shirt stretched across broad shoulders, and the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to him. Comfortable? He asked over his shoulder. As comfortable as I can be on a horse with a complete stranger, she replied, trying to keep her tone light. Dante chuckled. Fair enough. They rode in companionable silence for the first few miles, Tucker's steady gait eating up the distance, with surprising speed. The desert around them was coming alive with the approaching evening. Birds called from hidden perches, small creatures rustled in the brush, and the air began to cool as the sun sank lower. So what brings you out to the middle of nowhere? Cassie asked eventually, curiosity getting the better of her caution. Just passing through, Dante replied, which wasn't really an answer at all. From where to where? Nowhere in particular to somewhere else. Cassie frowned. You're not very forthcoming, are you? Are you? He countered. What's a woman like you doing driving alone on back roads in a truck held together with prayer and duct tape? A woman like me? Cassie bristled. What's that supposed to mean? Smart, capable, obviously educated. You could be doing anything, anywhere. Instead, you're out here in the desert, and from the look of those calluses on your hands, you're doing hard physical labor. Cassie was quiet for a moment, surprised by his perceptiveness. I run a cattle ranch outside Copper Creek. It belonged to my grandfather. Belonged? He passed 3 years ago and left it to me. I've been trying to make a go of it ever since. Trying? The single word carried a weight of understanding that made Cassie's throat tighten. The bank wants to foreclose. I've got until tomorrow to convince them to give me more time. Dante's back stiffened slightly beneath her arms. What do you owe? Too much. She didn't elaborate, unwilling to share the crushing details of her financial situation with a stranger. As they crested a small rise, the lights of Copper Creek appeared in the distance like scattered diamonds against the darkening sky. It wasn't much of a town, a few hundred people maybe, with a main street lined with old buildings and newer strip malls on the outskirts. But to Cassie, it meant sanctuary, a place where she could figure out her next move. There's a motel on the edge of town, Dante said as they descended toward the lights. Clean, reasonable rates. How do you know about the motel if you're just passing through? I've been through before. Another non-answer. Cassie was beginning to realize that Dante Rivers was a man of secrets, and she found herself wanting to know what he was hiding behind those blue eyes and easy smile. They rode directly to the mechanic's shop, a small building with a hand-painted sign reading Pete's Auto Repair. Despite the late hour, lights were on in the office, and an older man in oil-stained coveralls emerged as they approached. Well, I'll be damned, the mechanic said, his weathered face breaking into a grin. Dante Rivers, as I live and breathe, what brings you back to our little corner of nowhere? Hey, Pete, Dante replied, dismounting and helping Cassie down. Got a lady here with truck trouble. Blown head gasket on an old Ford about 15 miles out on Highway 67. Pete whistled low. That's gonna be expensive. Cassie's heart sank. How expensive? Well, parts alone will run you about $800, plus labor. Pete trailed off as Dante gave him a meaningful look. But I suppose I could work something out. Payment plan, maybe. I appreciate that, Cassie said, though she knew even a payment plan might be beyond her reach if the bank called in her loan. I'll have Jimmy tow it in first thing tomorrow, Pete promised. Should have her running by afternoon. As they walked, away from the shop, Cassie couldn't shake the feeling that there had been more to that conversation than she'd understood. The way Pete had deferred to Dante the sudden offer of a payment plan, it didn't add up. Thank you, she said, as they paused outside the motel. For everything. I don't know how to repay you. No need, Dante replied, tipping his hat. Just glad I could help. Where are you staying tonight? I'll find somewhere. He swung back up into the saddle with that same fluid grace. Take care of yourself, Cassie Wells. Wait, she called as he turned Tucker toward the road. Will I see you tomorrow? Dante paused, and for a moment, something flickered across his face, an emotion too complex to read in the dim light. Maybe, he said finally. Depends on how things go. And with that cryptic comment, he rode off into the darkness, leaving Cassie, standing alone in the parking lot with more questions than answers and a strange ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the day's troubles. As she checked into the motel and settled into the small, clean room, Cassie found herself thinking not about the bank meeting tomorrow or the truck repairs she couldn't afford, but about a mysterious cowboy with kind eyes and gentle hands who appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as suddenly. She had no idea that before the sun set again, her entire world would be turned upside down, and the dusty stranger who'd rescued her would prove to be far more than he seemed. Secrets revealed and hearts united. Cassie woke before dawn, her stomach churning with anxiety about the bank meeting. She dressed carefully in her only good blouse and the black slacks she saved for important occasions, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. The mirror reflected dark circles under her eyes and worry lines that seemed deeper than they had been just yesterday. The meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock, which gave her time to grab coffee and try to organize her thoughts. She had spreadsheets and financial projections in her folder, evidence of every penny saved and every improvement made to the ranch. But she also had the crushing reality of 3 months of missed payments and no clear path forward. Copper Creek's Main Street was already bustling with morning activity as she walked to the bank. She waved to familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson? From the general store, old Tom who ran the feed supply, Jenny from the diner, people who had known her grandfather and watched her struggle to keep his dream alive. The First National Bank of Copper Creek occupied a brick building that had stood since the 1920s. Its solid presence meant to inspire confidence in depositors. Today it felt more like a fortress to Cassie. Ms. Wells? The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a sympathetic smile, gestured toward an office door. Mr. Harrison will see you now. Cassie's steps faltered. Mr. Harrison? The new regional director, the receptionist explained. He flew in special for your meeting. That couldn't be good news. Banks didn't send regional directors to deliver payment extensions. They sent them to foreclose on properties and clean up messy situations. Taking a deep breath, Cassie knocked on the office door and entered when she heard a familiar voice say, "Come in." Her world tilted sideways. Sitting behind the massive oak desk, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and a burgundy tie, was Dante Rivers. Only now his hair was neatly styled, his face clean-shaven, and those blue eyes held a gravity that hadn't been there yesterday. The transformation was so complete that for a moment she wondered if she was seeing things. "Please sit down, Ms. Wells," he said formally, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "You," she whispered, sinking into the chair. "You're Dante Harrison," he said quietly. "Regional Director for First National. And yes, Before you ask, Rivers is my middle name. The folder in Cassie's lap suddenly felt impossibly heavy. You lied to me. I never lied, Dante said carefully. I just didn't tell you everything. You let me think you were just some drifting cowboy. Cassie's voice rose, then she caught herself and glanced toward the door. You sat there and listened to me pour my heart out about the bank, about losing the ranch, and you knew. You knew you were the one who could save it or destroy it. Dante stood and moved to close the office door, then returned to his seat. Yes, I knew. Why? The single word came out broken. Was this some kind of game to you? Some twisted way to get information before you foreclose? No. Dante leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. Cassie, I want you to listen to me. Really listen. She crossed her arms, her whole body rigid with betrayal and hurt. I've been tracking your account for months, he began. Not because I wanted to foreclose, but because I was impressed by what you'd accomplished. Do you know how rare it is for someone to take a failing ranch and turn it around the way you have? I haven't turned it around, Cassie said bitterly. I'm 3 months behind on payments. You've increased cattle production by 30%, improved grazing management, and reduced operating costs by 20%, all while dealing with the worst drought in 50 years, Dante continued. Your grandfather would be proud. The mention of her grandfather made Cassie's eyes burn with unshed tears. If he'd be so proud, why are you here to take it away? I'm not. Dante opened a folder on his desk and removed several documents. I'm here to offer you a complete restructure of your loan at a reduced interest rate, with your missed payments rolled into the principal balance. Cassie stared at him. What's the catch? No catch. There's always a catch. Banks don't just forgive debt out of the goodness of their hearts. Dante was quiet for a long moment. You're right. There is something else. Here it comes, Cassie thought. The real reason he'd rescued her yesterday. The real reason for his kindness. I want to invest in your ranch, Dante said. As a silent partner, I provide the capital you need to expand, modernize, maybe buy some of the adjoining land that's coming up for sale. In return, I get a percentage of the profits. Why? Cassie asked suspiciously. Why would someone like you want to invest in a small cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere? Dante stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Because yesterday, for the first time in 5 years, I remembered what it felt like to be useful. Really useful. Not just moving money around or signing papers that affect people I'll never meet. I helped someone who needed help, and it felt. It felt what? He turned back to her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. It felt like coming home. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Cassie spoke. You could have told me who you were last night. Would you have trusted me if I had? Would you have let yourself be honest about your situation if you'd known I was from the bank? She considered this. Probably not. I've spent the last 5 years in boardrooms and corner offices, making decisions that affect thousands of people. But I lost touch with what those decisions really mean. Yesterday, seeing your ranch through your eyes, understanding what it represents to you. He paused. It reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. And what was that? To help people build something lasting, something that matters. Cassie looked down at the loan documents in front of her. The terms were incredibly generous, better than she'd dared hope for. But accepting meant trusting the man who had deceived her, even if his deception had been born of good intentions. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. Dante returned to his seat. Take all the time you need. The offer will remain open. Cassie stood to leave, then paused at the door. The mechanic yesterday, Pete. He knows who you really are, doesn't he? Dante nodded. My family has been coming to this area for generations. Pete worked on my grandfather's cars when I was a kid. So you really aren't just passing through? No, Dante said softly. I'm not. Outside the bank, Cassie sat in her rental car and tried to process everything that had happened. Her phone buzzed with a text from Pete. Truck's ready. No charge. Hope things work out for you. No charge, because Dante Harrison had paid for it. She drove to Pete's shop, her emotions swirling between gratitude and indignation. Her truck sat in the parking lot, looking better than it had in months. Pete emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. She's running sweet as honey, he said with a smile. Dante's a good man, you know. Don't let the suit and tie fool you. How long have you known him? Since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His family owned the big ranch up in the hills until his daddy sold it and moved to the city. Dante used to spend summers here with his grandpa, learning to ride and rope just like any ranch kid. What happened to him? Pete's expression grew serious. Life happened. Success happened. But I think he's been missing this place more than he let on. That evening, Cassie sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. The ranch spread out before her, 3 generations of her family's dreams made manifest in every fence post and water tank. Her grandfather had built this place with his bare hands, and she'd been willing to do whatever it took to keep it alive. But now she had to decide whether she was willing to share it. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Dante approached, on Tucker, back in his cowboy clothes, looking like the man she'd met yesterday rather than the banker she'd faced this morning. Figured I owed you an explanation, he said, dismounting and tying Tucker to the porch rail. More than one, Cassie replied, but her tone was softer than it had been earlier. Dante settled on the porch steps beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. My family made their money in cattle and oil 3 generations ago. I grew up with every advantage money could buy, but the best times of my life were the summers I spent here with my grandfather, learning what it really meant to work the land. What changed? My father died when I was 25. Suddenly I was responsible for a business empire I'd never really understood or wanted. I threw myself into it, thinking I could honor his memory by being successful. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why any of it mattered. Cassie watched his profile in the fading light. And yesterday reminded you? Yesterday I met a woman who was willing to risk everything for a dream that wasn't even originally hers. Who got up every morning and did hard, honest work because it mattered to her. Who looked at problems as challenges to solve, not obstacles to complain about. Flattery won't make me forget that you lied to me. I'm not trying to flatter you, Dante said, turning to meet her eyes. I'm trying to explain why I want to be part of what you're building here. Not as some rich guy looking for a tax write-off, but as someone who believes in what you're doing. They sat in silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Finally, Cassie spoke. If I agree to this partnership, what happens when you get bored and want to go back to your corner office? I don't have a corner office anymore, Dante said quietly. I resigned this afternoon. Cassie stared at him. You what? I submitted my resignation to the board. I'm keeping my investment portfolio, but I'm done with corporate banking. Done with meetings about meetings and decisions made by committee. So what are you going to do? Dante gestured toward the ranch spread out before them. I was hoping to become a cattle rancher, if my partner will have me. The word partner hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that went far beyond business arrangements. You barely know me, Cassie said. I know you're honest, hardworking, and brave enough to chase dreams that scare other people. I know you love this land and respect what came before you. I know you make incredible coffee, and you're not afraid to get your hands dirty. You learned all that in one day? I learned what matters in one day. Cassie stood and walked to the porch railing, her hands gripping the weathered wood. This is crazy? Maybe. But sometimes the best things in life start out looking a little crazy. She turned back to him. Equal partners? In everything, Dante confirmed, rising to stand beside her. And you'll pull your weight? No expecting special treatment because you're bankrolling the operation? I wouldn't dare. I've seen what happens when you get angry. Despite herself, Cassie smiled. I wasn't angry yesterday. You haven't seen me angry. I'll try to avoid it. They shook hands formally, sealing their business partnership, but neither of them let go immediately, and in that extended moment of contact, both felt the spark of something deeper. 6 months later, the Copper Creek Gazette ran a story about the remarkable turnaround of the Wells Ranch, now expanded and modernized thanks to a partnership with a mysterious investor. What the paper didn't report was the wedding that had taken place quietly on the ranch itself, with only Pete the mechanic and a few close friends in attendance. Cassie kept her name, and Dante kept his promise to be a true partner in every sense. Together, they built something that honored the past while embracing the future, a ranch that would provide for generations to come, and a love story that proved. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with a broken-down truck and a chance encounter with a stranger who turns out to be exactly what you never knew you needed. As Cassie liked to tell visitors, she'd thought she was just getting her engine fixed. She never guessed she was about to find the missing piece of her heart.